Welcome back to another episode of the BioHub. Today, we're delighted to welcome Jaideep Dudani, a scientist, biotech entrepreneur, and investor at the cutting edge of immunology. Jaideep is the founding CEO of Ouro Medicines, who pulled off an incredible 120 million Series A round in January. And Ouro are a company pioneering next-generation T-cell engager therapies designed to reset the immune system in autoimmune diseases. Jaideep is also a principal at Monograph Capital, where he helps incubate and grow transformative life science ventures. And before Ouro, Jaideep was part of the leadership team at HiBio, where he helped drive the strategy behind their portfolio of precision immune modulators before their acquisition by Biogen. So join us today as Jaideep will give us a run through his journey, Ouro Medicines, exciting new data, as well as building companies from the ground up. So Jaideep, thanks so much for coming on. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having us. It's a real pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, and it's a pleasure to have you on as well. So look, let's start off with your path into biotech. So can you walk us through your journey from academia to venture and now founder and CEO?
Yeah, sure. It hasn't been a master plan. Let's start with that. I think that's important to say from the bat. I'd originally thought I'd stay in academia, so I did my PhD in bioengineering, and I really enjoyed the work, enjoyed being in the lab. I thought maybe I'd become a professor, and I loved the science, but over time I realized I wanted to have a more direct impact. And I thought about why I liked academia, or the parts of academia I liked. So I'm trained as an engineer, and for us, it's all about the useful application of science. And so I always was interested in the translational aspects of whatever I did. And so that's kind of why I transitioned out of academia. And then, the entry into venture, it's, again, wasn't planned per se. I got a bit lucky. I was in Boston at the time, and I ended up being the first associate at Vida Ventures in Boston. And that was when Vida was just starting. So they, were managing a couple $100 million in capital, and now they're managing over 1.5 billion. But it was great to be there at the beginning, and I learned then, how to turn these scientific ideas into real medicines and real companies. I think that was really informative. And what was interesting is you kind of have the same principles of academic science, but there's so much more complication, right? Because you add people and corporations into the mix. And from there, it was a good time. So, I was lucky to be working with great folks like Fred Cohen and Ari Beldebrand and other folks at Vida, and had the opportunity to help, do some company building work. And so at Vida, we started a company called Kyverna, which is now using CAR T-cell therapy for autoimmune disease. And kind of got excited by that whole prospect. So I took a little bit of a detour out of venture into a biotech company in Boston called Relay Therapeutics. And it was great to then go from investing to inside a company and kind of see both sides of the same coin, essentially. And, once I moved back to California, went back to company building again and helped build a company called HiBio that you mentioned, and now Ouro. And, I just kept following whatever got me excited. And when something really compelling came along, I found a way to be a part of it. I think an advice that I got from my PhD advisor was, you can try to plan as much as you want, but you're going to make the best decision you can at the moment. And so just keep doing that, as opposed to trying to create, a 10-year vision per se.
Very good. And Ouro are tackling autoimmune diseases in a very novel way. Give us a run through, where did the idea come from, specifically OM336? Where did that come from as well?
Yeah, I think you highlighted in the beginning, right? At Ouro, our goal is to enable immune reset. What that really means is these deep, durable remissions in autoimmune diseases without the need for lifelong immunosuppression, right? These are patients with chronic immune disease. They always have to take steroids, or they're cycling through antibodies every couple months. And so the idea is to try and give them a therapy that can give them months or years, if not longer, period where they don't really have the disease, right? And the name Ouro itself comes from the Ouroboros. So if you look at our logo, it's the snake eating itself. And this is an ancient symbol of, renewal and rebirth. And so we went through quite a bit of different naming schemes to reflect that. But really, for us, the name is the mission. And it really just resonates with what we're trying to do. For us, this is for me, I guess, a journey that sort of goes back to Kyverna, which I mentioned earlier, right? That CAR T for autoimmunity. And, along with the experience I got at HiBio, which is long with plasma cells, right, as the key cell source that produces the autoantibodies that cause these diseases. So essentially combine these two ideas, right? CAR T cells, but to target long-lived plasma cells that we did at HiBio. And that's kind of the merger of those two resulted in Ouro. With the CAR Ts, so OM336 is a antibody, right? It's called a T cell engager. The same idea as a CAR T, really. You take T cells and you redirect the T cells in the body to the pathogenic plasma cells and B cells. And we saw the CD19 CAR Ts working quite well, but they weren't hitting these population of cells called CD19 negative cells. And these CD19 negative cells are what we think are the true pathogenic driver of disease. And we thought BCMA was a bit misunderstood, and OM336 as a BCMA T cell engager we think could actually result in pretty remarkable efficacy in a bunch of autoimmune diseases. And we're developing it in rare autoimmune cytopenias, but also broadly. And the data to date really is showing us that it's basically an antibody injection with the potency of a CAR T therapy, but with much better safety. So putting that all together is kind of how we formed Ouro and OM336.
Exciting. And you guys recently announced some really exciting new data. What can you share about that, and how does your approach stand apart in what is quite a crowded immunology space?
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that. Just a couple of weeks ago, we announced, a New England Journal publication with the first clinical data of OM336, which is our BCMA T cell engager in autoimmune hemolytic anemia. And so this is the first time there's ever been publicly disclosed data for a BCMA targeted T cell engager in this disease. And there's a reason it ended up in the New England Journal, because it was very compelling. Essentially, what we saw was a short course of subcutaneous, just an injection of OM336 led to deep and rapid B cell depletion, including in tissues, not just in the blood. The two patients that were reported were really relapse refractory, tough patients. One was a pediatric patient, one was an adult, but they basically got every therapy known to man, both standard of care and investigational, and still weren't responding well until they got to OM336. One thing that was compelling as well is our molecule was engineered to have a wider therapeutic window compared to the approved agents. And what we saw due to a detuned CD3, and what we saw was there was no CRS, which is cytokine release syndrome, which is a side effect you worry about with these molecules, or no ICANS, which is a neurotoxic immune toxicity. And we didn't see either of that in these first two patients. So on this tolerability side, it was quite positive. On the efficacy side, these two people had very low hemoglobin. Essentially, they feel really tired, life-threatening levels of low red blood cells, needing constant transfusions. Hemoglobin normalized within a month, and patients stayed in remission at least 6 months so far. And as a reminder, they only got a few weeks of therapy. So they get a few weeks of therapy, and then they're off all therapies. So we think this is evidence of that immune reset that we're talking about earlier, where the autoreactive B cells now are gone, the autoantibodies are no longer being produced. So really, this is just a start for us with OM336. We disclosed this data and our intention, with hemolytic anemia and another related cytopenia called ITP, immune thrombocytopenia. But again, this is just a start. We're really excited about this molecule. And what's compelling about molecules like this, and we saw this at HiBio, is once you start understanding how to dose these medicines, there's 25, 30 indications that we could go after. And so now for us, it's about sequencing growth of this molecule. And, I think that's part of how we approach the world. I think you mentioned, autoimmunity is crowded. That's great for patients, really. It's, I wish I was the only person sometimes developing a BCMA T cell engager, because then I wouldn't have to worry about competition, but ultimately it's good for patients, right? And, for us, it's about finding our spots, right? Figuring out which of these indications we could go after, and then just really executing and moving quickly. This early data has been really compelling, and motivating for the team. And this is something that, we keep coming back to, like, hey, if we're able to succeed here and develop, this is the kind of outcomes that we can get to. And so that's been, I'd say, our North Star. It's about execution. And so ultimately, we're excited to be a part of a group of companies working to solve these diseases. We're excited about the molecule and that we're working on, and we think the initial clinical data sort of speak for themselves, and we're going to keep pushing forward. And hopefully, we'll find a path to differentiate and stand apart in that immunology space.
Very good, exciting. And tell us about the team that you've built at Ouro. I know when you start any new business, those first few hires are really crucial. What were you looking for in those early hires, and what makes the team gel or click?
Yeah, it's a great question. Where I ended that last discussion was, we just got to execute, and I think that's where we started when we were thinking about Ouro. Execution has multiple flavors, right? You need people that are heart charging, but also recognize that they're part of a team and know how to navigate, complex drug development, right? There's, no one person at any company can basically do it all. And so you have to find that culture that allows people to, navigate. So we've built a team that really is in the trenches, and, these are people that have experience in pharma, right? They have that, they've been part of 10 INDs or 10 phase threes, or what have you. But at the same time, they, almost all of them, I think all of them actually, most recently were in biotech. And that really is important, because, this is an area where you kind of just need to execute and roll up your sleeves and get things done. What's interesting is we, obviously we have different levels of the company, but we don't really have managers here, I guess. No matter your title, you're hands-on. And I think the data, as I mentioned, are really compelling. So it creates this play to win mindset. And that, I think, is something that we just keep pushing forward towards, right? And how we thought about hiring is, there's a few folks that we work with together, previously at HiBio, and that's always makes life a little bit easier, because we at least understand each other, right? And you understand, what makes them tick, what frustrates them, and you try to work through it. And then for other folks, we just make sure that, they come here, and whether you're a VP or in the C-suite, you expect to, you're actually going to do real work. You won't have a team of 10 people to orchestrate for you. And because of that, we're still super small. We're about 16, 17 people. And that makes it fun. We work hard, but no one really takes themselves too seriously. Which I think helps when things get frustrating, because you can always just fall back on a light joke here or there to sort of disentangle frustrations. So it's been a lot of fun because of that.
Very good. You've been involved in building companies from the ground up, so HiBio and now Ouro. What are the biggest challenges in going from concept to getting into the clinic?
Yeah. Oh, great question. I think I'd say there's two sets of challenges. We'll do the first, because we were just talking about it, as people, right? People are the funnest part of any job, right? You get to hang out with them. You spend a lot more time at work than most of us, I think, realize, right? You're going to spend 8 to 10 hours a day at work with these people, so you better like them. But equally, it's just as frustrating. Getting that right mix of talent, culture, alignment is everything. Like early on in, both at HiBio and Ouro, there were 100 different directions we could go, right? And until you settle on that direction, there's a lot of uncertainty. And what you need is to get people that understand that uncertainty, and that's sometimes a challenge, because sometimes people are just like, tell me what to do and I'll go do it. But in the beginning, you really don't know what you're doing. Um, and so that's part of it, and then I think more recently, the financial markets are a big driver of kind of what is the scope and the art of the possible. Right back when cost of capital was really low, the scope of anything you build could definitely be larger. Right now, the scopes of the companies we build are kind of more narrow, right? Just because that's what the capital markets would support. So I think that's one area, is just sort of the people and the external environment. And then lastly is the science, right? I think you need a right to win and you need a reason to win, right? Why are we as Ouro or we as High Bio doing this? What makes us the right company? What makes us the right people? Are our insights unique enough, right? And so what I found has been, works for me or has worked so far is looking at, um, looking at areas of science where I have a decent understanding, but then I find something surprising or just a little weird, right? And if you find something like that, you just pull on that thread and you try to figure out, why is that, surprising finding there, so that you can actually build a scientific company around it. That's just kind of what we did with Ouro, right? I think I mentioned, we thought BCMA as a target was a little misunderstood, because people had this perception that it was only expressed on plasma cells. And when you look at the data, it's expressed on a bunch of other cell types, memory B cells, included, which is a target we wanted to hit, a target cell. And so we just pulled on that thread and was like, is this real? Is this real? Can we chase that down? And so I think you got to find a reason when you're building the company to, exist, right? And then find the people that can understand how to take a giant, unformed lump of clay and at least make a house out of it. So I think putting those together is uniquely difficult, especially when there's no money around.
Yeah, whenever I speak to people and ask them that same question, it's always people first. Like, you could have the best science, best tech, but if you don't have the right people that have been there and done it, and every single time. So at High Bio, you had to course correct as the biotech market changed between starting the company and really getting it into the clinic. What was that experience like, and what lessons did you take from that into Ouro and future fundraisers?
Yeah, I mean, so we started High Bio in, I would say, like Q2 21, and we really completed a license with Morphosis, and we're in clinical development in like mid 22. So for those of you that remember what the XBI looked like around that time, right? It was kind of up and down all throughout. So it was certainly a crash course in navigating ups and downs, both in the markets, but also in with science and with people, and launching in a hard market. We had these, we had ambitions to build a broader platform underlying our programs, and you know we had some good ideas, I think, at the time for that, but it really just became that we had to become pretty lean pretty quickly, right? And so as we built Ouro, I kept that in mind. It taught me the value of staying lean, focusing on execution, and building a team that can weather those tough spots, but also that can weather the uncertainty, right? I think, again, you are hired into a company, and the company has a vision, and you're working towards that vision, and the macro changes, and suddenly you're like, wait, let's figure out what we need to do. That creates a lot of uncertainty for a lot of people, and sometimes you can't do anything about it as a leader. And it's frustrating for folks, and it's frustrating for me. I'd love to know exactly what I'm doing at all times. And so that was another important piece, is finding folks that can appreciate that not all the answers are obvious, and we're trying to build that through. And then I think it's really just, again, going back to how do we stay laser focused on our timeline to value creation with the capital that we have and the people that we have, and making sure that we don't get ever caught in a period where there's a big gap between when data is reading out and when we need to go raise capital, because you end up in pretty tough spots, and not relying. I think one thing that's for certain is I no longer expect there to be a bull market when I'm building these things. And that obviously, changes how we approach everything.
Yeah, good. And this is a question that we always finish with on the BioHub as well. If you were to have dinner with 3 people, past or present, who would they be and why? They don't necessarily need to be your biotech and pharma folks, although they can if you like. But yeah, 3 people for dinner.
Yeah, well, I think I knew you were going to ask me this question, and I kind of want to change my answer, but I'll tell you what I was going to say, and then I'll add a fourth. So, as you know, we have a newborn, right? He's 10 weeks old. So I'd love to have dinner with my wife again. It would be pretty awesome to have dinner with her again without, not that he's a screaming baby at all times, but really being worried about baby starting to scream midway through a dinner, and maybe a nice glass of wine. So that would be one. The other two, actually, it's you're over in the UK. It's Wimbledon right now, so I have to think about tennis. So the next one would be Roger Federer. He just seems to have a really interesting mindset. And what's interesting about tennis is, I think he gave some commencement speech where he sort of commented on this fact, but he lost almost half his points that he ever played. Right.
Yeah, I saw that as well.
Right, but he still wins most of his matches. I mean, I think it just tells you that you have to sort of be willing to move on, right? Like every day you have little battles, right? Like, oh, this assay didn't work or whatever. But you can sort of keep your eye on the bigger picture. And then just because I think it'd be really fun to see what that would be, but you'd add like Rafa Nadal to dinner, because I think they'd just be hilarious together, and then me and my wife would just get to enjoy that. And again, just another person that feels like, I don't know, just doesn't accept losses, even though it seems like he should. And so that mindset would be interesting to just understand how they. It feels like they kind of have to be goldfish. They like have amnesia after every single point. So it'd be interesting to talk to them. And then I guess my last one, I'm going to throw a bonus one, is it'd be interesting to have dinner with my son. If I could understand what he's thinking right now, that would be, I'm sure I'd learn a lot of what's going on in his head. But, it'd be, sure that'll happen one day when it's actually a proper dinner and not him screaming at me. But, that's the fun of parenthood.
Yeah. Well, look, 4 terrific answers there. Congratulations again on having your son. And I think you've given a really unique perspective on the company and pulling off that incredible fundraising round and just the data that's coming out. I think it's certainly a company that not just myself, but many others will be keeping an eye on for sure. So look, thanks so much for helping us out with this. And really appreciate the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for having me, and thanks for the great questions. It's been super fun. And, hopefully we'll keep generating interesting data at Ouro for people to get excited about.